But the theme this morning is stress, and we think that we know we found the perfect speaker to help us navigate and think more about stress. So I am very pleased this morning to introduce Jessie Schroeder, who is Deputy Director at Franklin County Family and Children First Council in the Building Better Lives Trauma Informed Initiative, where he leads community trainings and program development. He is also an outpatient clinician at Milestone Counseling in Grove City. Jessie, I'm very pleased to say, graduated from the Ohio State University School of Social Work Master's Program in 2012. Since then, he has worked with children, adolescents, adults, and families in the Columbus area. He has completed extensive training in trauma-informed care practices and is an expert in developmental trauma. Before he attended Ohio State, he was a high school teacher, and he also worked with children on the autism spectrum. And as a parent of a child on the autism spectrum, I just want to say thank you, Jessie, for what you do for our kids. Speaking today on the theme stress, please join me in welcoming Jessie Schroeder.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's really quite an honor, privilege to be here. Loved that conversation kind of before we got started. Like David was saying, I'm a trauma therapist by training. So stress is, a topic that I've studied, I've discussed, I've trained hundreds, maybe even thousands of people in stress. But clearly from the conversation we were having in the midst of this global pandemic, stress is something we're all kind of experts in. So we're all living in the midst of this stressful time. But I really hope this topic, hopefully what I'm going to share with you all today, it'll be really timely, hopefully helpful. A lot of what folks were kicking around before we started here, I think is going to tie right in with what I want to share. And hopefully I can give even a little bit more insight around how stress works and how we can understand it a little bit more. So you all definitely know about stress. Clearly from the conversation, you all know there is good stress and bad stress. Good stress leads to growth. It leads to progress, to transformation. So you might think like exercise, studying for a test, maybe even practicing to give a speech on Zoom to, let's see, where are we at now? 29 strangers across the city. Stress pushes us to grow, to progress, to get creative, to find new solutions to old problems. We definitely know about bad stress as well. No doubt, bad stress is overwhelming. Bad stress, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, and really it makes us vulnerable. It deteriorates our systems. It can stifle that creativity and be constricting. But I really think that it is a mistake if we make the goal to be to eliminate stress, because that good stress, it builds capacity and creativity. It makes us stronger. It makes us more agile so that we can achieve the goals and create the masterpieces that bring joy to our lives. So there's this stress sweet spot, like that healthy workout where you are tired and you are sweaty, but you feel stronger. A solid writing session when the words are just flowing and the ideas are just coming off the page. Maybe that guitar jam session, and afterwards the calluses on your fingertips, they hurt, but the next time you pick up to play that bar chord, you've got the finger strength to play with confidence. So there's definitely good and bad stress. And what if we could understand the core ingredients of stress so that we could shift the bad stress and move it into that sweet spot? And in my work with folks who have experienced trauma, I've kind of identified 4 key ingredients, 4 elements, if you will, of stress. It reminds me of a recipe, or if you think about the cookbook and then they turned it into a show, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Some of you may have seen that show or be fans of that chef and her work. You have key ingredients to any recipe, and we can adjust these ingredients depending on the dish that we're creating. We can adjust it based upon our taste and what we're kind of going for. So I want to suggest to you today that by changing a few measurements, we can make a good or a bad experience, that good or bad stress. We can knowingly build our capacity, increase our creativity. Or if we're not intentional about it, we can unknowingly let that stress tear us down. So my suggestion for you today is that we are going to dig into these 4 elements of stress. I want to name these 4 elements for you and how they give you some idea of how they work, how you can make some adjustments so that then you can have some of that insight into the stress that you're experiencing, good and bad. But before we go there, I want to tell a story. And I'm just going to let you know up front, this is kind of a lighthearted story. It is honestly a little bit embarrassing, mostly because this comes from way back when I was a teenager, back in 1999. I was 17 years old. But I think the story is going to help to make a few connections to what we're talking about today. So I was a senior in high school, and I had the chance to visit my extended family who was living in Japan and who still lives there today. My aunt and my uncle and 2 cousins. So you can see us here in these pictures. We're visiting the Golden Temple in Kyoto, and that's my aunt and uncle in the bottom photo there with one of my cousins at a yakiniku restaurant. And while we're there, of course, they lived in Tokyo, and so they wanted to take me out to a very nice, authentic sushi bar that was just outside downtown Tokyo. And the sushi bar was called Momotaro Sushi. And I just want to give a shout out to my Uncle Paul. When I was kind of prepping for this, I sent him an email and said, hey, do you remember going to that sushi bar? What was the name of it? And he remembered exactly the name and where it was. So I was able to look it up on Google Maps, and that is the restaurant that we visited. And those are some shots from inside the restaurant. This was a cool little sushi bar. It was a great little place. But look, for a 17-year-old kid from the Midwest, and at that point in my life, my travel experiences included Cheesetown, Wisconsin. I really didn't have any idea what I was getting into or what I was doing. As you can see from these pictures, you know, the menu is in Japanese, everything's in Japanese, right? Obviously, we're in Tokyo. Even the pictures on the menu were confusing. I had never ordered sushi before. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'd never even eaten sushi before. I was, you know, they said, we're gonna go out to this great restaurant. I was kind of looking down the street at the McDonald's and kind of wishing I could just get a quarter pounder. So there are these sushi chefs behind the counter, and they are working so hard. They are, you know, mixing plates up so fast, and they're working hard because my cousins next to me, Taye and Taiga, they're both younger than me, but they definitely knew what they were doing. They were ordering dishes so fast, they're putting these chefs to work. Plates are sliding down the counter, and they would scoop up the fish with that rice with their chopsticks like they were eating Cracker Jacks at a baseball game, popping it in their mouth as fast as they could come out. And I'm watching what they're ordering, watching what they're eating. And so I finally summoned the courage. I'm like, all right, I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to have my first bite of sushi. And one bite, and it was definitely not Cracker Jacks for me. It was slimy, it was fishy, it was spicy, and I just barely choked it down. And so for the rest of the night, I'm sitting at that sushi bar, just overwhelmed. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I'm just kind of waiting for it to all be over. It was definitely a bad stress experience. Now, if you know much about Japanese culture, food and hospitality are really extremely important. And so for my aunt and uncle to see their guests not enjoying the food, they were really concerned. And even the chef of the restaurant, he kind of noticed that I was just sitting there kind of downcast. And he came up to me afterwards and made sure everything was okay. He was worried that something was wrong with the food. And it was really embarrassing for me to admit that I just didn't like sushi. And it was honestly shocking to them. I mean, they couldn't believe it. They're like, "You don't enjoy this?" And the chef was so concerned that he actually gave me one of the tea mugs that they used in the restaurant as a gift. And I still hold on to this today and keep it with me in my office. So even though every part of that meal was embarrassing and stressful, I still hold on to this tea mug as this reminder. I really missed out on some good sushi that night. So I tell you this story for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's food related. It ties into this metaphor that we're going to unpack. And honestly, I like food. I like food stories. But it's also really an example of how, if we just make a few adjustments, that experience can either be bad stress, overwhelming, kind of scary, not enjoyable. Or maybe with a few small adjustments, I could have increased my capacity to eat different kinds of food, expanded my horizon, my culinary horizon, and I could have enjoyed a nice sushi meal. So what are these 4 elements of stress that I keep referring to? The 4 elements of stress are frequency, duration, intensity, and complexity. So consider just for a moment that thing that is causing you that bad stress right now. Could be centered around COVID, could be COVID adjacent, could be a new reality that this pandemic is causing. I think for a lot of us, as we move into this fall season, there is so much stress. School, work, politics, national politics, local politics. The experiences of stress are really as many and as varied as the people that we have joining us today. But I'm going to describe these 4 ingredients to give some insight into how we can make some adjustments. So let's start with the first one, with frequency. Frequency is just kind of what it sounds like. It's the number of times that a stimulus is activated. It's the easiest part of stress to identify and potentially make a quick adjustment. So just think for yourself, that experience of stress that you're thinking about, how often is that stressful stimulus being activated? Could you make an adjustment? Could you decrease the frequency of that stressful activation? Or maybe you need to increase in order to build capacity. So here's an easy example. If the source of that bad stress for you is politics, it's just everywhere right now. You're frequently checking social media, you're checking the latest polls, then decrease the number of times that you do that behavior. Get intentional about identifying the thing that causes you stress. And if it's happening a lot, decrease that frequency. But it may actually be that you need to increase the frequency. So this is a little bit different, so hang with me. But look, in everyday practice or in everyday language, we call this practice. Increasing the frequency of something, practice it. But it helps to understand why practice calms our nerves. A higher number of exposures to a stressful experience builds a tolerance and a resilience. That's pretty key. I'm going to just say it one more time. So a higher number of exposures to a stressful experience builds a tolerance and resilience. So when I'm going to this sushi bar in Japan, I actually needed more experience with sushi, not less. If I had had some practice, maybe if I could have looked over the menu, maybe I could practice ordering in English or maybe even in Japanese. Maybe if I had ever actually eaten sushi, even just once before, that would have helped. I would have had more repetitions to create that tolerance so that the stressful experience would not be so stressful. Here's a couple of other examples of frequency and what that might look like for you. Maybe just letting somebody else know when a situation is new to you. Because the first time for any experience, it's going to activate our stress. A new experience, we're always going to be on high alert. Another thing that you could do is verbalize your fears. The act of talking things out is actually a way of increasing the frequency. When we talk it out, it gives us a way to process and discuss and activate that stressful experience in a way that's under our control. It's one reason why talk therapy can be effective, but also why just calling up a friend or a family member and saying, hey, this is something I'm kind of freaking out a bit. Can I talk to you about it? And when we talk about it, we increase that frequency in a way that moves the experience into that good space of stress. So that's frequency. The next one is duration. Again, it pretty much is what it says it is. How long are you exposed to that stressful stimulus? Too much of anything for too long is going to push you into that bad stress zone. And I'm feeling this right now. Maybe some of you are as well. In my home with my wife and kids, for those of us, following these stay-at-home orders, working from home, we are spending much, much more time with our loved ones. It is a long time. We're 5-6 months into this. And without a break, without some change, that long duration, it causes some stress. Unrelenting, unending stress creates a vulnerability. So what's the duration of the stress that you are experiencing, and can you make a little adjustment? Now, here is the key insight. Just like a recipe, these ingredients work together. Duration and frequency are two ingredients that go hand in hand. It's kind of like salt and pepper. When we're trying to build capacity for higher stress and creativity, what we want is small, tolerable doses, short duration, high repetition. And this is the genius of Julia Cameron and the morning pages. You write every day, but only 3 pages. High frequency, low duration. And this builds a capacity for that stress and a way to handle that stress of creativity. So think back again a little bit here, that stress that you identified. Could you adjust the duration? Maybe you need to, set a limit. This is what we call boundaries. Saying to somebody, I love you, but I need 30 minutes where I need to be alone. I need to set some boundaries. When we think about the challenges, the stress of the long, hard work of social justice movements, we're finding that rest, adjusting that duration, is key to sustainability. Rest itself is a form of resistance. We've got to be intentional about adjusting that duration so the stress is manageable and is a good stress. The next ingredient I want to throw out to you and suggest as a way for us to gain some insight into our stress is intensity. When we're talking about intensity, it's the force or the magnitude of an experience. And the sweet spot for intensity can be different for different people. Some of us love the soft, quiet sounds of Brian Eno. Some people, they want to turn up the beat and have the power of Beyonce. And so there's a spectrum, and it kind of is up to that personal preference, almost like the heat in a recipe. Some like it spicy, some not as much. We can adjust the intensity of an experience to kind of create that optimal stress. So thinking back again to my experience in the sushi bar, I can't remember what I ate. I don't know the name of that dish, but I can tell you it was way too much sushi. It was too intense. I probably would have been better served if I would have started with some shrimp tempura, just a simple, maybe something, a small bowl of rice, low intensity, ease into it. So what's the intensity level of the stress you're experiencing? Is it building your capacity or is it tearing you down? Can you tone down that intensity a little bit? Or Maybe you need to increase some intensity in your life to get that sweet spot. Working from home, for a lot of us, we're less physically active. So we might need to add in some exercise, add in some movement, get some intensity into our daily routine. I'll tell you, for me personally, in my life, this has been an area where I have needed to make an adjustment. During the first few months of the pandemic, it was obvious that so many people were struggling. Particularly, we were hearing about a lot of the challenges that folks were having with anxiety and with mental health needs. And what was so hard was that we were all told the way that we could help was to stay home, to social distance. And so during that time, I was continuing my job, doing online trainings, but it didn't provide that intensity of really connecting with the root of the problem that I felt like I needed. So in the past few months, I've added in outpatient therapy work. And so I have the opportunity to meet one-on-one with individuals who are really addressing some difficult challenges. It's high intensity, but it's for a short time, and it hits that sweet spot for me. When I come home from those outpatient sessions, I'm energized, I'm encouraged, and then I'm more engaged with the rest of my work and my projects. Just want to say one last thing here about intensity that's really key. Intensity is really all about control, particularly when we are talking about the arena of experiences that are stressful. It is really crucial that you are in control, that you can stop something from becoming too intense. You've got to be able to control that volume knob. If someone else is cranking it up and you can't say that's too loud, turn it down, it's going to be a challenge. So that control is really key when we're talking about intensity. All right, last one I want to throw out to you here is complexity. It's similar to intensity, but I think it will be valuable for us to reflect upon it separately. Especially in this time when a lot of our stressors are existential. We're thinking about the economy, we're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about a global pandemic, civil rights, political parties and causes, really complex ideas, complex stressors that create a significant amount of bad stress. So if I can reduce the complexity of that activity, it might help me to put a handle on it. And this might be as simple, again, as something we do a lot, sitting down and making a list. When I can see it in bullet points, it's written in ink on paper. That challenge now is a little more simplified. It's a little bit more manageable. So what might this look like for you? It might mean that even though you've got this huge life goal, this vision, this really complex idea and dream, today's task is to take the next step. The way that we build that capacity to handle stress, to increase our creativity, is focusing on what is in front of us right now. I think this is especially key for creative individuals because we can envision this highly complex final product. I can see it in all of its glory, but to get there, I have to focus, simplify, make a list, and take the next right step. So that's my offering to you all this morning, the 4 elements of stress: frequency, duration, intensity, and complexity. And our goal is not to eliminate all stress, but to be wise, to be intentional about the stress that we bring into our lives. And I just kind of want to pause for a second before I wrap up. And I want to acknowledge that we are certainly not talking about stress in the abstract or in the benign. Our collective experience of stress right now is extremely intense. It's highly complex, it's interconnected, and we are facing a constant, unrelenting barrage of news notifications, changes, and for many of us, threats to our very lives or the lives of people we love. But even in this difficult time, even today, I do think that we have some control. We have a capacity to adjust our experience so that when we can build that capacity and build some creativity. And we need that. That's why this is so important. I get passionate about this because we need the wisdom and the insight to be able to handle this stress now more than ever. Look, this fight is not going to end just because we're tired. The answers are not going to get any easier just because we've grown tired of the questions. And when I look at my young daughters, I know they are not going to give me a pass when they get older because I say, well, I didn't know any better back then. I'm going to be held accountable. I have to turn my face to the challenges that are here today and that are coming down the road. And when I think about that, I'll be honest, it makes me want to crawl under the sheets and hide and just ignore it all. But if I can do some work, if I can apply some insight, some wisdom, some understanding of stress to make some adjustments, maybe I can get into that sweet spot and make something happen, make a contribution, be creative, and come up with something new that's going to make a difference in my world and in the world of my children. So finally, in closing here, I just want to share some wisdom from the Enneagram. The Enneagram is a personality typing system that I've found to be really helpful for me. And one Enneagram teacher whom I follow says that we can't take care of ourselves without understanding how we respond to and behave under stress. We can't take care of ourselves without understanding how we behave under stress. And right now, we've got this opportunity, really unlike any other in our lives, to see how we behave under stress and how we need to adjust. So my sincere hope today is that you walk away with a better understanding of these elements of stress, and that in some way it was helpful that you can have some insight how to shift them, maybe even in these most difficult of times. Thanks for the privilege of sharing with you all this morning.
You're hearing my applause, Jesse, and you're also, if we were in a room, you'd be hearing uproarious applause, I think.
Well, thank you so much. I thought you were gonna have, be able to kind of feed that in. You were gonna,
well, yes, right,
the crowd
yes.
noise fed in for me.
Yes, we need to make it part of our playlist, right? No, thank you. That was fantastic. And again, we gave you, I think, a really difficult task. When I was introducing this at last month's Creative Morning, I said, our theme next month will be, and I took a very pregnant pause and said, stress. And there's lots of groaning and these sorts of things. But I think you really handled it with aplomb and with hopefulness, I think. We've lots of time for questions or comments. If you have questions or observations, please include these here in the chat, and we'll make certain we'll get to as many as we can. Jesse, I've got a number. I'm going to start maybe with a pretty basic, prosaic one. You had talked about the value, the importance of sort of talking about your stress. You said, give a call a friend or something like that. Talk about your stress. I see a lot of people talking about their stress over social media. I see a lot of sort of openness, maybe even too much openness sometimes on social media as people sort of vent their stress. Is that healthy? Would you sort of recommend that, or is that sort of problematic or maybe unhealthy?
Yeah, it's a really great example. So I think it's kind of funny when we sort of ask that question, like, is it healthy? Is it problematic? Like sometimes, you don't need an expert in stress to kind of tell you, like, you probably sense like it's not very healthy for me, right? My sense of that, the reason why it's not healthy is when we post about our stress on social media, and when everybody's doing that, that increases the frequency. And now I'm just hearing about everybody's stress, and it's just ping ponging around like those lottery balls, that it's just chaotic. And that's all I'm hearing all over the place. Right. So, thinking about frequency, duration, when it's on social media, it's everywhere and it's all the time, and I don't have any control over it, unless I choose to turn it off. So I think there's a lot more benefit to that conversation with a friend. It's really different if I called you up, David, and said, dude, man, I got this stuff going on. Like, can I just tell you about this thing that's happened? And even if we have a long talk, 45 minutes, but then it's done, and it's not continuing to show up in my feed and kick back to me all the time. So I think that's not to say that there isn't any value. I think social media is an area right now that we are all trying to get some insight and some wisdom on how to use it in a way that actually makes us feel better and actually benefits our lives. There definitely are ways that happens, and there definitely are ways where that is not happening.
Are you finding in your counseling that because we've been asked to social distance and to sort of stay in place, are people finding it difficult to? I mean, obviously, I can connect with you via my phone. Are people expressing any sort of difficulties like that?
Difficulty connecting with folks?
Yeah. So one of the things that historians saw after the 1918 pandemic, which is constantly being held up as an analogy to our own moment, is that during and after that pandemic, there was a lot of social isolation. Sociologists and historians have talked about sort of social isolation. Are you seeing or sensing any of that? I hope the
Yeah, I don't
answer is
know.
no, but
So, anything that I would kind of share on that would just be anecdotal, and I would certainly be interested to hear what other people are kind of seeing and, from their own lives on that. It does seem that we're pretty good at connecting, and a lot of folks are finding ways to stay connected to people that are important in their lives. But again, thinking that setting up those boundaries and having maybe a little bit of social isolation isn't the worst thing in the world. And so there may be something where some folks are finding the value of being alone, finding the value of, I certainly think we're seeing a lot of folks enjoying nature more, being outside more, taking more walks. And then again, it's always that kind of check-in, but is that isolation getting to a point where it's deteriorating and I need to engage with somebody? So that's really kind of why I like to think about these 4 ingredients. There's no one right answer for anybody, right? Just like there's no one perfect recipe where it's like, this is the one meal that everybody should eat. Hey, that's not, I might need to boost up the flavor on this one. I like something a little bit sweeter. And there are some people where that social isolation for a period of time, Thoreau at Walden Pond, it was great. And it was a gift to humanity. And there are some people where that's a slippery slope into depression and it's not healthy for them. And so we got to adjust that a little bit and see how can that be more helpful for them.
We've posted here in the chat the NAP ministry, and a lot of people have been sort of talking about it. Tell us what the NAP ministry is.
Yeah, so I don't know a ton about it. I think a few folks maybe might have more experience with them. Lauren, I think you maybe mentioned that you kind of follow them and have some more connection, but it's connected to social justice work and encouraging people to find the value and recognize that resting, taking a break is a form of resistance, and just always pushing, working, that is going to burn ourselves out, and that is not sustainable and is a damage to ourselves. So taking care of ourselves is a part of doing that resistance and engaging in the social justice work. So Lauren, you kind of said that duration, frequency, intensity, and complexity. I do think rest is very much tied to that. There is a lot of neuroscience around the value of sleep and rest. I know Brandy is somebody who loves to talk about sleep, and I think she loves to take a good nap as well. But rest is the time when our brain, that complexity can calm down a little bit, and it can integrate and synthesize all of the experiences that we're having, so that then we can kind of move forward and mature and develop and start to move ahead. So.
And you're already sort of heading this direction. One of the questions here is what different types of rest looks like.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we want to see if other folks have ideas around that, like what what different types of rest might look like. That's really interesting. I mean, of course, I think just literally sleeping and sleep is really important. And in my, in my outpatient work, it's one of the first things I'm always asking folks: how are you sleeping? And if your sleep isn't healthy, you're not going to get healthier. It's just the fact of how our bodies are built. You've got to have a healthy sleep rhythm.
Lauren says reduced inputs, breaks from things like social media, TV news, even Zoom. That's a form of rest.
Yeah, I think we have this language in spiritual practices where we call it fasting.
Mm-hmm.
And the intent is it's this intentional break to get grounded and to set that limitation. And what we find is when we decrease that duration, when we take that intentional break, when we return to it, we have so much more of an appreciation, so much more of a sense of the value of what we're returning to. And there's a lot of connections and phrases with that. Even resting from relationships, even from meaningful, from your loved ones. We say absence makes the heart grow fonder. When I'm away from you, then when I return to you, I realize just the value of that relationship.
Like Ross and Rachel, they were on a break. Luis says hiking, outdoors activity. That's a form of rest. And I haven't done as much hiking this summer as I would have liked. Brandy says she's camping right now. That's terrific. Glad that.
Yeah, I love that, Luis. I mean, and that's a great one where we think about kind of the value of that intensity as well, right? Like that hiking, it's one where you kind of decrease the complexity of some of the things in your life, all the kind of technology stimuli. So things are just much more simple, right? Like I am on a path and I don't really have to make any choices or decisions, like one foot in front of the other. That's all I have to do. But it's also high intensity. Like I'm working, I'm going. And so a good hike like that is really something that puts us in that kind of healthy stress space. And you might kind of find when you're doing that hike, after you hit maybe like a 15, 20, 25-minute mark, your thinking and your creativity is just going to hit a different level. And some of those questions, some of those problems, some of those concepts kind of synthesize, and you kind of find that creativity sweet spot because you've hit that spot of high intensity, but it's kind of simple, and you're able to kind of move into that healthy stress zone.
Either Jeremy or Debbie, maybe both, have said compassionate care hours at work have been so helpful. Can you tell us a little more about what that means, either Jeremy or Debbie?
Sure, that was me. I actually work with Jesse. I'm
cool.
co-deputy director of our initiative here, and so I always love to hear him speak, so I thought I'd pop on. But
he's quite good, isn't he?
He's great. So our agency has recognized, especially in the last 5 months, that people just can't commit 8 hours to working from home and have a healthy work-life balance with kids and school and everything else going on. So we've instituted this thing called compassionate care hours. So the expectation is you work 6 of those 8 hours, and then you have 2 hours wherever you want to put them in your 8-hour workday to take a break from Zoom, take a break from the computer, in addition to like your half-hour lunch. So it's been really helpful in kind of striking that balance again. So I think that that's been a way to find rest in the midst of everything else going on.
How just so humane. I wonder if others in their workspaces have that sort of.
If not, I hope they recommend it to their.
Yeah. So I was about ready to say privilege, but I don't want to say privilege. I think that ought to be just sort of a requirement. That's just a human requirement.
Yeah, that understanding from an employer has been really helpful, and so I'm hopeful that other employers across the county, across the state, across the nation have also kind of seen that and recognize that with their employees as well.
We're running up against time, Jesse, but I wanted to get your thoughts. You had said you kept talking about or optimal stress or a stress sweet spot.
Yeah.
Tell us about your stress sweet spot.
Hmm.
And it's probably not
Oh, way to
sushi.
turn
It
it
must be
back on
something
me,
else.
man. Wow. What'd you say?
It's probably not sushi, but
Right. No. Uh, yeah, you know, I do think for me, music is a big part of it. Poetry is a big one for me. You know, there's a certain sweet spot in poetry where every word is so loaded and so intentional, right? There's that high intensity, high complexity with poetry, but yet it's also very like digestible and manageable. So you know, for me, kind of engaging with poetry on a regular basis, it just makes me kind of focus in and have that awareness of sort of what each word, each experience really means and the weight of that, and kind of really savoring it. Again, thinking about like the connection to a recipe, right? Am I savoring each bite? Am I really savoring each word?
does that mean reading poetry or writing it or both?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah, I for a while kind of had a goal where I try to you know, have 2 poems a day, one found and one given. So a poem that I find and a poem that I offer.
Alicia,
730 poems a year is the goal. So one found, one given. So I haven't got there yet, but working on it.
wow. Uh, so, so to follow up on that, Alicia asks, how do you recognize that you've reached your stress sweet spot?
Mm.
That's for you, Jesse.
I'm thinking,
I'm
yeah.
stressing you.
That's great. How do I know? So some people will kind of talk about, you know, feeling that sense of flow or that sense of engagement. I think that it is, again, I love this kind of metaphor of cooking and a recipe. It's when you experience it and you say, I like that and that feels good for me, that's where I'm at, right? But it does take some tweaking and some adjusting, and then it's also kind of then what's the aftermath of it, right? A lot of times when we eat a meal, we might like it in the moment, but then it maybe doesn't feel so good a couple hours later. And do we feel better after we eat that type of food? And so when we are engaging in that experience in the moment, is it high engaging? Am I activated with it? And then afterwards, how am I feeling? And so even one kind of check back on that can be, how am I sleeping? Am I able to kind of get into a good rest space because I've worked hard, I've put in that work, I've had that high intensity, and now I can get into this rest space, right? If I'm not sleeping well, then I'm still trying to work out some of those things, and I'm still kind of dealing with some of that. So
There's a request to recommend some poets to read.
yeah, I'll put one in there. Clint Smith is the most recent one that I've started reading, and I'd have to look up the name of his collection, something Descent, but it's very good as well if you're kind of engaged with some of the social justice and racial equality movements right now. His stuff is really powerful in that realm. Audre Lorde has been one for me for a long time that's really meaningful. Yeah, I think some folks put in there John O'Donohue is really good. And certainly I would second the On Being podcast. One thing that's great is when they interview poets and have those conversations. So I frequently return to Mary Oliver, John O'Donohue for sure, but would highly recommend Clint Smith's. His is pretty recent, is really good.
Can't go wrong with Mary Oliver. Can't possibly go wrong with Mary Oliver. Jesse, I'm going to thank you for this. As I said, we put whoever is going to be doing this talk was going to be put in a very awkward situation, talking thoughtfully and productively about stress. And I think that you more than impressed us, I think, with
Well, thanks.
with this.
It's been a real pleasure, a real honor. So.